Hi, it's Paul Guppy with the Washington's Policy Center, and here's our regular update on issues that are affecting our state. And first off, of course, always I like to remind people to please like, share, subscribe. We really appreciate that, or leave a comment. I love reading the comments. But let's just jump into the issues. Today, I'm going to be talking just briefly about the end of the federal government shutdown, how that affects us here in Washington state. Could the state government ever shut down? I'll address that. Also, an idea of a new wealth tax coming, possibly in January. What does it take for the government to build a bridge for the I-5 crossing the Columbia? I'll give an update on that. Also a private donation, big one, to early learning programs. There's some complications there. Is it the end of the climate change crisis? I'll talk about that. And then a quick wrap up about Seattle's new mayor, definitely on the socialist side, self-declared. She is talking about government grocery stores as well, so I'll have some comment on that. But let's just dive in first on the big government shutdown with the federal government, the longest shutdown ever, 43 days. Government shutdowns date from the mid to late 1970s, which is when the first ones happened. There have been 22 shutdowns total. I've been part of those when I worked in Congress, so I experienced what that was like from the inside. The current, what a shutdown does, I mean, you hear about it in the news all the time, but the technical part is that if October 1st passes, which is the federal government's fiscal year, and Congress has not passed an appropriations bill for those agencies that are covered, then under the 1982 Anti-Deficiency Act that Congress passed, those agencies lose the legal authority to spend money. Actually, the U.S. Treasury loses the authority to spend money because all the expenses and bills for all federal agencies go through the Treasury. So that's why a shutdown happens. The latest one has been wrapped up, and that's good news. It was 43 days, and I don't think we accomplished anything, but again, that's national politics. But the other aspect is the cost. So there are different estimates as to what it costs the country. But one of the big ones is just the government freezes up, everything's delayed, it causes a lot of trouble for everyone. One estimate says that this latest shutdown cost $1.5 trillion to our economy. That's like a man-made natural disaster, something very costly to our economy that didn't need to happen. It also, and again, our concern at the Washington Policy Center is about civics and trust in government and things run smoothly. And thankfully, the state government does not shut down. One reason for that is that the legislature wraps up its budget session every 2 years in May, late April and May. And the fiscal year for the state doesn't end until July 1st. So you have all that time in between for the legislature to work out any problems. Under Inslee, there were 2 or 3 special sessions one year that extended the session, but still they did not get close to that July 1st deadline. So thankfully, Washington state government does not shut down, as well as other states. The other good news in Washington state is that our state doesn't have the legal authority, and hopefully never will have the authority, to run a budget deficit, because lawmakers love to spend money and push the cost off onto the future. That happens at the state level, or the national level. We have a national debt, but fortunately we do not have a state debt as well. And so running a budget deficit at the state level can't happen. And again, that's another important safeguard. The other main safeguard at the state level is public opinion, where hopefully the public would never tolerate a shutdown, that there would be a major political cost for that for both parties, Democrats and Republicans. And really the message from the public in our state is, hey, we've given you $77 billion to run the state. Now pass a budget and get it done. And so far, the legislature has been able to do that. Next issue is the idea of a wealth tax is now back on the table since we're heading into the next session in January. Some Democrats are pushing hard for this. They have renewed confidence coming out of the last election just earlier this month at the national level and at the state level. So Democrats are really feeling strong, and there are some wing of their caucus definitely wants to push this wealth tax. The problem is that tax policy is not just about money, it's about respect. So the main question is, does the government really need more money to create a new tax? Of course, advocates will say, absolutely, yes. I mean, you know, the state never has enough money. That's their attitude. But I don't think most other people feel that way. And considering that every single dollar that the state spends was earned by somebody else in the private sector, It's a matter of dignity and respect for lawmakers to say, hey, we've taken enough of your money. As I said, we have $77 billion, a record high. In May, the governor signed a $9 billion tax increase. So the question is not just, do you have the political votes to pass a new income tax on our state, but is that money really needed by the government? I think the answer is clearly no. And the legislature has plenty of money to fund the government. Of course, they always want to overspend and lock in new spending for the future. The specific wealth tax proposal would be 9.9% on incomes over $1 million. That sounds like super high earners. It's not going to affect most of us. Well, there are some practical problems here. Number one is it starts out at people at $1 million, but pretty soon they would be lowering those thresholds and we would end up having an income tax applied virtually to everybody. That's exactly what happened with the federal income tax over the course of a century. The federal government applied it to now we all pay it. That would happen with a state income tax as well. The other practical implication is, sure, $1 million in annual earnings sounds like super wealthy people, which they are, but who are some of these people? So people like technology executives, investors, doctors, specialty surgeons. There are many fields in which high-level performers can make $1 million in a year, and they've earned it considering what they do. Those are not the kind of talented people that we want to drive out of the state. If anything, we want to encourage more doctors to live in our state, and applying an income tax would cause that talent to go someplace else. It would also discourage investment. For people who live at this high level, it's extremely easy for them to change their residence to another state. It's already happened with the capital gains income tax passed. We had high wealth individuals moving out of the state. The same thing would happen if there was a wealth tax. The last point I'll make on that is, why do they label it a wealth tax? I think all taxes are on wealth. They take away our wealth at whatever level it is. So that circles back to my point about respect. It's not about the dollars. It's about whether lawmakers are listening to us and not adding to the financial burden that they impose on us. Next issue I want to talk about is how long does it take for the government to build a bridge? So the Columbia crossing, the I-5 replacement bridge, has been debated for decades. Charles Prestrud on our staff has been following this issue closely, has the latest updates, which are posted on our blog. But I did some historical research, and it was interesting to me that the first floating bridge across Lake Washington, built in the late 1930s, early 40s, took 2 years to build. The bypass viaduct that used to go along the Seattle waterfront, built in the 50s, that took about 1.5 or 2 years to build. They've been studying the Columbia River crossing for more than a decade. Charles's research shows that they've spent over $273 million on planning. This has not accomplished anything at all. The major holdup is whether light rail should be on the bridge. Oregon officials are insisting that, yes, the bridge has to carry light rail. Their latest estimate is that it would only carry about 5,000 passengers a day, so few that they would reduce the schedule to being only about 4 trains an hour crossing the bridge into Washington State. By way of comparison, the current bridge carries daily traffic of 288,000 cars a day. So the purpose of the bridge is really for automobile traffic. Light rail just adds cost and complication and would certainly not meet even the low passenger projections that they have. By the way, light rail never meets its passenger projections. Public transit use is declining, so there's no reason to hold up this bridge for that reason. The legislature is likely to kick this planning down the road again when they meet in January. They will enact another 10, 20, $50 million, I suppose, for planning, again, accomplishing virtually nothing. And so they'll delay any decision at least until 2027 or beyond. And it just shows the ineffectiveness of government to get anything done. By the way, most of the study is environmental impact, but there is already a highway bridge right there carrying 6 lanes of I-5 across the Columbia River. If you've already got built infrastructure, I don't see what the big environmental impact would be. In fact, a new bridge would probably have less environmental impact than the one that's there now. The way I like to think of it is that lawmakers like to brag that they're building a bridge to the future, but our officials can't seem to build a bridge to Oregon. even to replace one that already exists. So moving on to the next issue is the Steve Ballmer Group, which is a philanthropy operation, has agreed to donate rather $1.7 billion, $170 million over 10 years to state early childhood learning and assessment programs. This has been welcome relief from the governor, held a big press conference touting this, how delighted he was to receive $1.7 billion in free money from a private entity. And he says that there's nothing but good things about this. First of all, this is a bailout for early learning programs that the Democrats cut in the last session. So it's kind of saving their bacon in a way by coming up with funding that they had already reduced. But the other problem with it is that this money also comes with conditions. So the Ballmer Group has said they'll donate this money on the condition that the legislature not cut the program in the future. Okay, maybe that's good policy in terms of budgeting. But the major problem becomes when private entities are donating money to public programs with conditions attached. And it's the left who complains about privatization all the time. Well, in this case, just pouring money, private money into a public program also means that lawmakers are going to lose control, management, and influence over this program. Short term, it looks great, but longer term, it does create a problem of very wealthy private influence. I feel like a lefty making this argument, but it's actually true that private donations are great as long as they go to individuals and nonprofit organizations that are independent of politics and the government. So for example, my recommendation to the Ballmer Group would be donating $170 million to pay for early childhood education or daycare is a great thing. Why not give the money to low-income families that are meant to be benefited and give the grants directly to individuals who can then make decisions for their children? Funneling it into a government program, I think, is not the right approach with this. Still, the state has the money. The last point I'll make on this is that they'll, in 10 years, then what happens? So the other problem with private funding for public programs is when the private funding goes away, lawmakers will be in a crisis. They'll call that a cut, and guess who they'll turn to for a tax increase in order to provide that funding. So that's another bad precedent right there. Next is, I have a question here in my notes, which is, has the climate activist bubble burst? Many people saw in the news that Bill Gates, who was attending a climate change conference in Brazil, made a comment during an interview that climate change is not going to kill us all. He said that the issue is serious, but it will not destroy humanity. Well, it's the first time I've heard that reasonable message coming from someone who's a little bit more on the left side. Bill Gates has supported virtually every climate environmental issue that's out there. And for him to give this note of reasonableness and balance, based on science, by the way, our own Todd Myers has pointed out that climate change, it can be managed. We can make adjustments, particularly based on technology, consumer choices, market forces are all good ways to bring efficiency to the way we use energy. We don't need top-down government programs. For Bill Gates to basically say that this crisis is either over or never existed, hopefully will change the political dynamic. We will not be faced with these end times predictions coming from the left that it's the end of the world if we don't put billions of dollars into climate change programs or we cut back on our energy use, which just leads to poverty. So I think there's a better way to manage the issue. I think Bill Gates is showing a fresh opinion about it. And then the last issue I'll touch on is that Seattle has elected a new mayor, Katie Wilson, and she has already talked in the past about government grocery stores. Whether she follows through on that, we shall see. She calls it a public option for stores that are in a, quote, food desert in neighborhoods of the city. Whenever I hear these terms, I think to myself, socialist in action. First, they denigrate the private market, overregulate it, tax it, drive businesses out of business, and then say that there's a failure and that there's a food desert. So grocery stores, supermarkets, they like to make money just as much as anyone else. And if they're able to operate in a certain area, they will. The government doesn't need to come in and backfill that. So Katie Wilson, I think, should take a look at what is driving grocery stores out of certain neighborhoods in the city in the first place. Public safety is a big issue, shoplifting, taxes, regulations, as I said, energy costs, the high property tax, all of these things add up to make it very difficult to run a business in the city. And instead of the government opening its own grocery stores, maybe they should look at what is the problem that they are creating in the market. The last point I'll make about this is I see a pattern with different areas of our lives here, things that are policy areas, and that the pattern is the following. Every time the government gets involved to help in a certain area, it drives up prices. The examples I would give are housing, higher education, healthcare. In every one of those areas, the government at state and federal level is heavily involved, regulating, taxing, subsidizing, and in every case, prices are getting higher and higher and higher. 15 years ago, we passed a thing called the Affordable Care Act. Healthcare is not affordable. Housing is highly regulated. College tuition is subsidized through federal loans. And what are universities going to do? Raise the price of tuition. The same thing would happen with grocery stores. As soon as the government gets involved, then prices are going to go up, and there goes affordability. So with that, I'll wrap up this summary of issues. We have a couple of events coming up that are very exciting. Our Saving Hospitals event is happening in Spokane on November 19th. And then our exciting Young Professionals group has another fun gathering put together at Brown Winery. That's in Bellevue, and that's on November 20th. Very relaxed ability for conservatives to get together socially, make friends, and have fun. So I hope if you're in the area, you'll consider that. And I'll be back in the future with another update. Thanks for listening.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.